All right, we are live. Jack Thomas, welcome back to the future of fitness, my friend.
It's good to be back. It's good to be back after 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years, right? That's bananas. So 2019, that was when we released our first interview together, and of course, we were able to do something like we're doing now. For people wondering, like we're spending a few hours, my evening, his morning, and we're recording a couple podcasts, which is just the way you do it when you're professionals.
Yep.
But you've got a great thing going from what I've seen and what I've talked about. Fitness Business Asia podcast, your three locations. Um, Over in Asia, the brick and mortar concept that you have, and now the Fit Guide is really intriguing. I've been following it, and I know a lot of people within the industry are just really appreciative and cheering for this thing. It sounds like a really cool project, so I'm excited to highlight that. And
Mm.
maybe let's start with this. If just remind people who you are, Jack, in case they haven't listened in the last 4 years.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to start. So I'm Jack Thomas. I've been in Bangkok for 20 years. And funnily enough, over the last few months, every single person that's asked me how long I've been here for, when I say 20 years, they've just been completely stunned and shocked, really, that you could spend so long in a foreign land so far from
Wow.
home. But I came here in 2003 as a backpacker and basically ended up staying. I was traveling for a bit, teaching English for a bit, doing clothing export for a bit, and then got in the fitness industry 12 years ago. So I've really seen the Bangkok fitness industry grow from almost nothing to the thriving market and industry it is today. And so that was as a coach, first of all, then as a manager, then as an operator of three clubs, as you said, called Base. Anyone can check that out at Base Bangkok. And then I started a podcast in 2018. When did you start yours, Eric? It was around about the same time, was it? A
Yeah,
little bit before,
2017.
maybe?
Yeah, October
Okay.
2017.
So we started our podcast at around the same time. We first connected in 2019. The podcast has been an awesome journey. And then the Fit Guide is a project I started around about a year ago. So yeah, that's a very brief intro to me and what I've been doing.
Yeah, well, there's if people are interested, just go to Jack's LinkedIn. You can find out all about him and all the stuff that he's doing. You consistently post, and it's always insightful. So I encourage people to do that. There's a lot of different things I want to cover today with you, Jack. I mean, I know you're fresh off the Fit Summit over there in Asia. It's really keen on what that is. I always look at it kind of with jealousy. I'm like, God, I've really got to get out to that thing. It looks amazing,
It's a long
and I
way
know
for you to go, but it'd be
it
nice to have
is.
you there.
Yeah, it is, but it just makes it more of an adventure. Um,
Right, right.
let's start with this. It's kind of a sore spot, right? But the pandemic, it's been 4 years since we've connected, and a lot has happened in that 4 years, as we've talked about ad nauseum. But it's been some of the most interesting years the fitness industry's ever had, and I think we tend to be very North America focused when we talk about our own stuff here. We don't look outward a whole lot. But I'm curious, about your experience through the pandemic. How was it in Asia? How is it recovering now? We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I think a lot of people would be interested to know.
Sure. I just recently had a chat with Mel Tempest that also went out on her podcast. And of course, we have a little podcast group that we're setting up as well. So it was good to have a chat with her about everything that's been going on. I thought she made a great point, which was people are saying, we can't talk about the pandemic. Let's not dwell on the past. And I do totally
Mm-hmm.
agree with that, right? We've got to be positive moving forwards. But we can't deny it's had an immeasurable impact on our lives and on the industry. So to just not mention it at all, I think is almost a little bit irresponsible. And certainly here in Asia, we are still feeling the hangover of the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. Thailand, especially, is really struggling to recover. There's really not much going on here in the industry at the moment. It's been slow for us since 2021. We're seeing a very slow, gradual step by step forwards, but it's been really, really tough here. And the rest of Asia has been the same. Singapore, it kind of exploded into life in 2022, and there's all sorts of things happening there. But now we're seeing concepts close down. There's a lot that we're either too reliant on ClassPass, or rental rates are now going up because there's a lot of expats and other people coming and moving into the country. And so we're kind of again seeing these shifts and these trends and these hangovers that are happening from the pandemic. Really, there's no denying that it is from that. Thailand, where I'm based, as I said, has been struggling, and I don't really know why it's been struggling more than other Asian nations. I just found out at the Fit Summit last week that Philippines, Manila, has now overtaken Bangkok in terms of ClassPass bookings. And I was really
Wow.
shocked to hear this because Bangkok's always been, I would say, like second tier. You had Singapore, you had Hong Kong, and then you had Bangkok sitting right underneath. And Philippines and KL and Indonesia were quite far down, I would say. We were a good few steps ahead. So again, it's been interesting to see the shifts and change. And honestly, Eric, I don't really quite know why that's happened. So yeah, it's had a massive impact. We're still getting over it for sure, but I'm still massively bullish on the future. I actually think now's a good time to make moves in Thailand, and that's what we're looking at doing at base. You know, there is this lull. We are struggling to pick up, but it will come back, and it will come back strong. And so I actually think there is more opportunity than ever, you could argue, now in the Asian fitness industry. But you know, as I mentioned, you know, rental rates in Singapore are just shooting up massively. I'm speaking to studio owners where their rents have gone up 50%, and
Oof.
that's tough. You know, that can take you from having a decent studio that's making some decent money to break even or even losing money. It can be the difference. So a lot of shifts, a lot of change, very interesting, but a huge amount of opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And what made it so tough? Was it like, was it government involvement, like dictating specific things? Was it, actual, sickness, like people really getting sick? Was it, lack of medical access or, difficulty with medical access? What were the qualities exactly, do you think, that made it difficult for you guys?
It's so interesting. It's so fascinating to kind of look back over the last 3 years because there was a moment where it looked like Asia was the best place in the world to be.
Hmm.
Everyone was diligently wearing masks and staying at home, and numbers were low, and there were many zero COVID countries like Thailand. So 2020 for us was pretty much fine. We had a little spike, and then there was zero COVID for like 7 months. And it was basically business as usual, everything back to normal, whilst the rest of the world burned down. And I remember saying to people, wow, Asia's a great place to be. They've really got on top of this. They're a little bit more obedient here, and that's helping us get it under control. And everything looked rosy and wonderful. Of course, the way that it went, it just ended up ripping through the population. It's probably here to stay now, right? And it just sort of goes through its cycles like the flu does. And so when that started to happen, Asia couldn't ditch the whole we need to take this seriously, we need to wear masks, we need to have restrictions, whereas the West was accepting it and opening up, and people's mentality was changing, and they just wanted to get back into living their normal lives. Here, we are still feeling that. You walk out in Bangkok now, most Thais are still wearing masks, even walking along the street outdoors, and I think psychologically, that tells you that there's still something in the air that's dangerous. This is still something we need to take very seriously, and it does stop people doing things like going to the gym, living their lives as normal. So really the thing that helped us in 2020 in Asia ended up massively hurting us. China's another great example. They had zero COVID for a year or so, and they were having massive parties and everything was amazing and they were showing off to the world. Look how that ended. It did them well in 2020, maybe a bit of 2021, but when COVID finally hit China, I mean, we all saw over the last year where everywhere else in the world had opened up, but they still had these crazy lockdowns and they were welding people into their condos because there were outbreaks. So it was almost like the thing that benefited us early hurted us later. And now I'm actually quite jealous of the way the West is and the way they've handled it. And it made me value freedom. I think that's really become a sort of personal value of mine. And really, who knew this, right? Who knew how it would all pan out? And looking back in hindsight, you can say these things, but it's just been interesting to see how that's developed. And I just hope we've kind of learned some lessons, but I don't think Asia really has. I mean, one final word on that. I think the West would not accept lockdowns again. There's so many,
Mm.
I think, positive conversations around was that a good idea? No, it probably wasn't. And the repercussions of that. I don't hear those conversations here in Asia. And I actually think here is potentially vulnerable in the future to going into a lockdown where I don't think the West would. And so I think that's personally, I think that's dangerous and that kind of scares me a little bit. So yeah, there's long-term PTSD and repercussions here, I think, which aren't being talked about in the same way as the West.
Yeah, it's good to know, and I appreciate you
Mm,
sharing all that. It's just good to know, from reference, like how different people dealt with it and handled it. And I think we all kind of, naturally, kind of look in our own bubble and concern ourselves. We rarely look outward and see what's going on. And you look at like the freedom concept of. There's a reason why so many people went to states like Texas, Montana, Florida, Idaho, Tennessee, right? It's like people really didn't want to be told what to do. And we'll see if we ever go through that again, which statistically we probably will. What'll happen if we'll just forget? I mean, we tend to have as a species amnesia about things. And yeah, well, anyway, Thank you for that. Let's move on to
Yeah, no worries.
some
Something a
forward
bit more
thinking
positive,
stuff here.
yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about the Fit Summit. You just got back from there. Um, it's in Singapore, right? And tell us what that's all about, and maybe some of the takeaways and learnings, your involvement in it. How was that experience for you?
Fit Summit's awesome. I'm just a massive fan of the whole thing. People often ask me if I'm sort of involved. I'm not like a part of the team there or anything else, but I've been involved since the first one as a speaker. We've got Ross, who runs the Fit Summit, onto the podcast numerous times. He's just a great guest, like yourself, got loads of good stuff to say, really great insight into the industry. And it's just been so cool to see them grow and develop. I mean, they launched in 2019. That was their first Fit Summit in Singapore. Then they had one in Hong Kong. And then they basically went into lockdown with everybody else. And the way that they navigated that, I thought, was expertly done. They had a very strong online presence during lockdowns and everything else. And they've just sort of come out of that era in such a strong way. Interestingly, I hear a lot of people coming from the US and Europe that they say Fit Summit is their favorite event like this.
Awesome.
They say it beats FIBO and Ursa and all the other ones. They say the vibe is better. The quality of the speakers, they say, is better. I can't say firsthand because I've never been to Ursa or never been to FIBO, but it's just interesting to hear that. They say the vibe of collaboration is a lot stronger, which I can certainly see and feel. Not that it's stronger than the US or Europe, but that it's certainly present and it's certainly there. So it's just a great place to connect. The team there are so hospitable. They do an amazing job of connecting people. The Fit Summit was launched with a value of collaboration, which I really love, and that's one of the values of the Fit Guide as well. We want to work with the fitness industry, and I think that's worked so well for them, and that they've really helped to bring the industry together. And in Asia, not quite sure how it is in the US, I kind of hear differing things, but in Asia, I think before the Fit Summit, and before the Fitness Business Asia podcast as well, which has also tried to do this, I think there weren't really many friends, there wasn't really much collaboration, there wasn't really many great minds coming together, and I think the Fit Summit's really open that up a lot, and I think it's had really, really strong benefits for the fitness industry. And so to be in Singapore last week, I actually had COVID last year, so I went to Singapore and missed the whole thing, so I couldn't actually join the event last year. So to be there this year, it was the biggest one yet, to meet so many great people, so many people I've done podcasts with, so I've only met them virtually online over the last few years, and to actually meet them in person was really awesome. And the last thing that was cool is people I've never met before come up and say, mate, I listened to your podcast and I really like it and it's really helped. And sometimes I wonder with the podcast, like, you can see people are downloading it, so that's nice. But you're like, is this actually helping anyone? Is anyone benefiting from this? There are moments when you think that, and it's really cool to have people come up and say, look, I listened to the podcast and it's really helped. So that was, something that was really nice as well. So look, if anyone's in Asia or looking to come over to Asia for the Fit Summit, then I would highly, highly recommend it. And it's expanding out. So they're going to be in Riyadh early 2024, Sydney later this year. And what will be really cool, and I'll definitely be coming over for this, is I believe it's confirmed as New York now. It will definitely
Wow.
be in the US.
Fun.
And I think it's now confirmed as New York, and that's late 2024. So yeah, I couldn't recommend it enough. People should definitely check it out for sure.
Yeah, man, I love myself a good New York trip. When you look at the Fit Summit, that was excellent. I mean, you fired me up. I can't wait to go. What what are some of is there any trends you pulled away or topics that were impactful for you? Any aha moments that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest one is the one that I've kind of reflected on a little bit. I thought that Thailand was recovering slower than other markets, but to hear the franchise owners and people that are making big moves in the industry here just not mention Thailand was really, really interesting for me. I mean, again, I think it's important to say this because, maybe if people heard me talk about the pandemic here, they think that sounds a little bit doom and gloom. I'm massively bullish. There's so many great brands coming into Asia. There's so much investment coming in. And look, Thailand's not going to mean much to your listeners. If we talk about it more on an Asia scale, there's so much going on, so much happening, so many brands coming in. And they're coming in through Singapore, which is really interesting. Singapore is, although there's market conditions which are tough, like rental rates going up, I mean, it's absolutely booming. It is insane. One thing I just find mind-blowing coming from Bangkok, if we just take one metric, so in Bangkok, we've got 2 F45 locations. In Singapore, there were 50 F45 locations. That's only a
Whoa.
city of 4 million people. That number's starting to dwindle now, obviously, because F45's just not doing so well as a brand. But now you've got Body Fit Training coming in, and they've got 30 locations opened, 20 locations secured, and they believe by the end of the year they will sell another 20 territories. So that's 70 locations in a city of 4 million people. So when you look at Bangkok, we've got 3 locations. Honestly, I could probably name you 2 or 3 other locations that I would consider competitors. It just gives you an idea of the scale of the market in Singapore and what's going on there. Fitstop are going in. All sorts of Australian franchises are coming in. So that's just really sort of exciting to see. So many companies are betting big on Asia. They're bullish and they're coming in. And whilst I said Thailand's difficult, like I said, it will absolutely improve. And I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be absolutely fantastic. So I think the scale of the opportunity is interesting. Seeing Pilates do so well, and there's so many Pilates brands coming into Asia and doing well in Australia, that was another trend that I'm certainly seeing. And in this region as well, just franchising in general, we've seen a shift over the last 10 years that I've been in the industry from independence over to franchise. And I think now it's becoming harder for independents to thrive, but it can absolutely still be done. But I think the franchises are coming in, they're delivering their concepts slickly, they've got strong marketing power behind them. And so they seem to really be leading the way in Singapore. It's more of the independents that I'm speaking to that are really struggling and finding those numbers different. So yeah, that's a few takeaways that are kind of
Mhm.
quite Asia specific, I guess.
It's really interesting. I don't expect you to be an expert in geopolitics or macroeconomics, but what do you think drives the growth in Singapore overall? I mean, is it are they is it just overall? Because I know they have very balanced approach to different industries. How it was very intentional with the way Singapore was developed. Um, it's just whatever I've read. I've never been there, but what do you think specifically about that
Yeah, really,
region that makes it grow?
really good question. Yeah, it's something I've reflected on. I mean, you'd had Singapore and Hong Kong that were
Hmm.
running alongside each other, and Hong Kong's just been battered for various reasons. The political stuff, the COVID lockdowns. I mean, again, it just lasted longer than everywhere else. When everywhere else was open and you could fly around, you just couldn't go into Hong Kong. You still had to do like a 7 or 10 day quarantine. And so I think you had Singapore and Hong Kong leading the way, and Hong Kong's just been battered. So Singapore is really thriving now as Asia's sort of fitness capital or just business hub in general. It's very business friendly. So, Thailand's quite difficult to set up a business. Singapore's very easy. India's almost impossible, for example. So I think those things do make a difference. And then the biggest thing I would say is just the total addressable market is so much bigger because everybody can afford to spend $200 a month, or pretty much everybody can afford to spend $200 a month. Whereas in Bangkok, it's a very, very small percentage of the population, and I think that's why we only have a few studios very concentrated in central Bangkok that charges these kind of rates. Outside of that, people either don't have the money, or if they do, they don't quite understand why you would spend $200 on a gym. Whereas in Singapore, people can afford it and they're sort of educated on it. Most of them have studied abroad. They went to London, they went to the US, they've done all of these concepts before. They get it, they understand it, they like it, and they want it in their country. So in Singapore, in a way that you don't get anywhere else in Asia, or certainly outside of Hong Kong, if you go away from the main city, there's still body fit trainings, there's F45s, there's Pilates studios, there's personal training studios, and they're priced not that much differently to the center. So that makes it an especially exciting prospect. You come into Thailand, you can probably open up a couple of branches, and that's pretty much going to be it. Maybe one in Phuket, arguably, and that's it. Whereas Singapore, it's a tiny little country, small city state, low tax, very business friendly, and you can open 70 locations where you're going to put your focus there, right? And so
Wow.
yeah, that's usually the gateway into Asia, and then people kind of branch out from there. And that used to be, I think, Thailand first. Now I think they're looking at Jakarta, Indonesia, often because they're Australian brands coming in and it's a little bit closer to them, I think. So you're seeing Jakarta really develop. Manila's another hotspot. I mean, Bangkok's still there, it's going to come back, but it's just been a little bit slower. Kuala Lumpur is another one. Yeah, those are probably and then Vietnam, hearing a lot of interesting things around Vietnam developing and opening up and brands going there as well. So yeah, Singapore is really that gateway, and it's just a huge thriving, gateway of activity and life.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I really gotta get out to Singapore. It sounds great.
Yeah, come
What
over.
about Seoul? What about South Korea? I mean, I've heard great things about Seoul as well. I mean, is that market seeing any traction?
So interestingly, Seoul and South Korea and Japan are very detached in terms of the fitness industry, as is
Hmm.
China. Everyone in Southeast Asia is connected. I have so many people in Vietnam and a whole ton of people in Singapore and Malaysia. But South Korea and Japan are really quite detached, and trends that do well in Southeast Asia don't necessarily make their way there at all. So it's hard for me to speak directly of it. I know CrossFit did very well. for a long time. I believe F45 has gone into there as well, so a few franchises are going in, but nowhere near as developed as Singapore. Nowhere near. And then you have some random brands doing well, like Curves did very well in Japan for a while. I think they had like hundreds of locations. Orange Theory have started to develop a presence in Japan as well, but they haven't really done much in Southeast Asia at all. They opened 2 locations in Singapore, which closed. And I don't think they have a presence anywhere else in Southeast Asia, I believe, but they're doing okay in Japan. So it's very disconnected. You know, when I say brands come into Asia through Singapore, they then go into Southeast Asia. Whether they go into Japan or South Korea seems totally separate and totally different. China, I'm hearing that things are really picking up and they're quite lively and there's a lot of local brands. I think like you have a local Twitter and you have a local sort of Facebook, right? Weibo, whatever it's called. You also have kind of local versions of US brands as well. Like India, it's just such a difficult place to go and do business. You need, from what I've heard, a very, very strong local partner that it's just people usually just stay away from it. You know, so many brands have gone in and tried to do things, whether it's fitness or whether it's other areas, and just found it so hard. So again, China's quite disconnected. I have brought on a few guests over the years from those regions, and it's like they're talking about a whole new world to me. So yeah, interesting how it's kind of almost segmented, really, the fitness industry in this region.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I pull out of there is never sleep on Curves, right? That brand just seems to like, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like the industry, like it'll survive anything. It'll survive a nuclear holocaust. Curves will still be around. Um, let's shift to the Fit Guide. It's super
Sure.
exciting. I've been following it. I'm not even sure I totally understand the concept. I mean, I understand the concept, but I don't understand, the granular level about it. But I've been sharing it. It sounds
Thank you.
really cool. I think it sounds really interesting. So let's dive into. Let's start with maybe like what was the impetus? What was the moment you're like, okay, bing, I have an idea. Let's try this out.
Yeah, one of our biggest challenges is really communicating what we do, why we do it, and it takes a little while for people to sort of really get a grasp and understand it. But I think a good place to start would be where we first had the idea, which was myself and a really good friend of mine who has a very strong background in hospitality. And this was just over a year ago in Bangkok. The skies had just opened up, so we'd flown in, and I knew him from being a fellow Bangkok expat 12 years ago. That's how we met. And so he worked for a company here that reviewed hotels, and it always sounded like the best job in the world. I say review, evaluate's probably a better word. So he would go to 5-star hotels around the world, but mostly in Asia. And for this company, he would evaluate them and every single part of the process. We get to stay in these amazing places, but he always assured me that, Jack, it is actually a job, and sometimes it's not that fun, but it does look very desirable. And so he left that company in Asia in 2016 and started working for Forbes Travel Guide. Now, they are kind of the leader in hospitality or in hotel evaluations. And so he became the global director of evaluations for that company. So he was training up the evaluator team to go to hotels. He was reviewing the standards and the process that they went for every year. So he knew that process inside out, probably better than pretty much anyone in the world. And we were talking a year ago about what he was doing at Forbes Travel Guide and what I do in the fitness industry. And I just realized we realized there was nothing like this in the fitness industry. Hotels have the Forbes Travel Guide, restaurants, of course, have the Michelin Guide. Private hospitals have their own sort of independent anonymous guide and industry standard. Golf courses do, private airlines, all these industries. And I was just thinking, why not the fitness industry? We are ready for this, especially the experience sort of boutique side of the fitness industry, which is kind of our backgrounds, right? You were in CrossFit, I was in base. I knew it
Right.
needed something like this. I knew it was ready for something like this. So we kind of jokingly said we would develop an industry standard, kind of bring in elements of hospitality into the fitness industry, and we'll go 50-50 on it. But over the kind of a bit of a joke, we were having some beers at the time, didn't think that much of it at the time. But afterwards, in the next few days, it was just running through my head, and Matt as well, my business partner, just thinking, this is a fucking great idea. The fitness industry is ready for this. And so we just started developing it based on our standards at base, everything he does in hospitality. And it took us a good 6 months to really sign off our phase 1. We did over 100 test evaluations throughout Asia and Singapore and Bangkok. Friends went to the US, so they went to the top studios there and did evaluations, and we were just tweaking and refining the process to really build a set of standards that really fairly and accurately represented how high quality the experience was. A lot of the time we would run it by the studio owners afterwards if I knew them. So we'd do the evaluation, we'd run it by them. Do you think this is fair? Is this weighted correctly? Are there any standards that should be included that aren't? And so over 100 evaluations, these tests, we just tweaked and refined until we got it to a stage where we thought it really well represented an experience. And when we got to that stage and signed it off, as an operator myself, as a coach myself, I was really excited by it because I could just see that the value it brought or would bring to the club owner and the studio owner. So we developed this great process, and we've tweaked and refined it since then a little bit. We've already started working on our phase 2, which we'll bring in next year. We thought the best way to get this out there and have a big impact on the industry would be, just like the Michelin Guide, to go into the world's biggest cities and independently, anonymously evaluate the leading clubs and the leading experiences. So we decided on New York, London, Singapore to start. And so we went there, we hired people, we trained them up, which was more my business partner's responsibility. And we went in and anonymously went through the whole client experience. So that starts off with making a telephone call. We have standards around that, the arrival process, the actual group class itself, which is the most heavily weighted part of the process. That's 50% of the whole mark. And then the departure process. We also look at online presence, whether they use technology in their workout, even their social media online presence and the things they do around that to bring a score. This club, this experience, scores this much. And so we tweaked and refined. We made sure that again, it was a fair representation and that you really had to be very, very good to get our 5-star rating. It has to be over 90% of our 250 standards. And then we had a 4-star recommended, and we set the bar very high. So if you don't get 70% through our process, you don't get listed. And so quite a few of the clubs that we've gone to, we paid for classes, we trained people up, we paid the evaluators. They haven't scored our minimum requirement, and so we just haven't listed them. So now, Eric, we've launched New York, we've launched London. Singapore will actually be launching next week, Tuesday. By the time this goes out, it will be launched. We already have a team in Sydney and Dubai, and will, I think, next year be really rolling out through the US. We've had such a lot of positive conversations with brand owners, club owners in the US that we feel that the US is really the best market to really roll this out. So look, that's a brief overview of it. Let's dig in. If you have any questions, it's probably the best next step.
Oh yeah, I got questions, Jack. So, what does it sit on? I guess is it an app? Is it a website? Is it a web app? Like how are you guys organizing it all?
Yeah, at the moment it's a website, or you call it a
Okay.
web app, but we will definitely have an app. We're in the process of working on that. So it's again, the Michelin Guide is probably a good one that helps people understand it, because if you want to find a great restaurant in Tokyo and you really like fine dining and great dining experiences, you type in Michelin Guide Tokyo and it's going to come up, and then you can kind of sift through and look through the top restaurants. So it's like that. So there's no charge for consumers. If they want to find the best yoga studio in New York, they can just go onto the guide, hit New York. You can filter through Pilates, bar, cycling, hidden strength, yoga. And one of the parts of our research process that kind of really got us more excited about this and showed us the need is that when we were having that initial chat, we thought, well, if we want to find a yoga studio in New York, okay, so yoga class, yoga studio, best yoga studio in New York, something like that. And it was just a whole random mishmash of Yelp reviews, TripAdvisor reviews, old blog posts from like, Cosmopolitan in 2019, best bar classes in New York. Most of the studios had closed down. And we were like, this is not very helpful for a start, and none of it's objective. TripAdvisor can be manipulated. Yelp, you sometimes get disgruntled clients leaving you bad reviews, things like that. But there was nothing that was reliable and objective. And so that's where we really saw the need. So yeah, for consumers, they can go on and find, the best bar experience in New York at the moment, and later down the line, Montana and everywhere else, hopefully. And then for clubs, we offer services to help them improve and to help them get better. Every single club and every single brand we visited, we've fought as hard as we can to jump on a call, just like we're doing now, and go through what we've seen, the areas that they need to improve in, based on our particular standards and our process. And by and large, Eric, people have been really open to that, which has been quite surprising. I was expecting a lot more pushback. Not everyone's been 100% happy with what we've told them, but that's been one of the most encouraging things to me, is that people want to know this stuff. And we've had studios that didn't score very well. They have loved it and been all over it and want to work with us. They want to improve. They want to get reevaluated so that they can sort of see how they're doing. So the way the industry has accepted this has been pleasantly surprising, I guess. And for me, is yeah, it made me feel good, not just about what we're doing, but that, yeah, the best brand owners, the best business owners, they want to know this stuff and they do want to improve. And that's been cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that, we all have like this compulsion to be judged in a weird way. Like, do me next. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
right.
it's an interesting thing that we do have as humans. Uh, I guess the big question, you probably asked yourself this and you've probably been asked a few times, but where do you stand against like Google reviews, right? That would probably, I imagine, be the big elephant in the room for you guys. Is people tend to lean into Google reviews quite a bit, and it's not Yelp. Yelp is notorious for just I can't like Yelp. It's things they do sometimes. It blows my mind and how they can maintain influence over consumers. But Google reviews seems like it's pretty much driven by an algorithm that seems to be fairly unbiased. But are fitness consumers using that? And like, so where do you, when you thought about this whole plan, how did you look at Google reviews versus what you guys are doing?
So yeah, it's a little bit different what we're doing because we're trying to create an objective industry standard. So Google reviews, let's say
Got
for
it.
restaurants, is another, you can sort of compare it to that, right? So a restaurant might get like 4.5 out of 5, so it might be seen as quite a good restaurant. But one thing is that could be related to the price. So people could feel like, oh, well, it's good value, so I'll give it a higher mark. It's the same as
Mm-hmm.
TripAdvisor. You sometimes get kind of
Mm-hmm.
like old hotels are kind of a little bit run down, but maybe the service is wonderful and the family that run it are just brilliant, right? And so they kind of score higher. But actually, if you're looking for excellence, which is one of the things that the Fit Guide is about, and also the Michelin Guide, you might go there and you might be a little bit disappointed. Maybe the Ritz-Carlton down the road scored 8.5 instead of 9, but it's more sort of what you're looking for. So it's kind of talking to a little bit of a different market. Also, it does have, I know in the US there's a lot more Google reviews, so I think this gets averaged out a lot better. But for Asia, where it's not really used as much, one sort of bad client review, which could be a competitor, that definitely happens. Or what we get a lot at base, every single 1-star review we've had is because people have arrived late and we don't let them into the class. And we've got a great process. The front desk team have been very well trained to deal with this, but people aren't happy. And we have people turn up 15 minutes late. They haven't been let in. They're dealt with respectfully, but out of revenge, they've gone onto Google and left us a 1-star review. So that's kind of dragged us down a little bit. And then you kind of had to ask your friends, hey, would you mind leaving some reviews to kind of average this out? Now, I know in America, I think there's more reviews, but it still is open to disgruntled customers or, your biggest fans, perhaps, or, your family and your friends and stuff like that. Also, what you get with Google reviews is it gets disproportionately higher because people in the middle don't tend to review as much. So the only people that really review are the ones that are really, really happy, or your fans, friends and family, and then the ones that are really unhappy. So actually, if you
Mm-hmm.
kind of manage to avoid some of the unhappy people, you can score incredibly highly because the 3-star people can't be bothered. I only want to leave a review if it was amazing or if it was
Right.
absolutely terrible, right? And so that can pull the average up somewhat. There was an article that I shared a couple of days ago where F45 was ranked as the world's, I don't know if they said the world's best gym, but the highest ranked gym because they got 4.94 out of 5. And the next one down was like 4.5. So they were above all the other brands by like a significant measure. I would argue that's because they probably not pissed too many people off. All of their raving fans have left a review. I don't know if that was F45 overall or like one specific club, but to argue that's 4.94 out of 5, I would say that's probably not particularly reliable. And some of the brands that got less than that, I think were delivering just as good a service. So yeah, that gives you a little idea on some of the differences. What we're looking at is really an objective look at the brand, um, and yeah, just a bit more reliable, let's say.
Well, I would imagine too that it's more useful to the business owner what you guys are doing. And what I mean is like, Google reviews from outside of like a marketing perspective, like if you do well, it's great, right? People will consider it before they go to your establishment. But you guys seem to make it more useful to the operator as far as like, here's some critical feedback, right? And designed by fitness people for this specific niche to help them be evaluated and then use that information to improve. I mean, I haven't seen it, but just from hearing you talk about what I've seen online, that seems to be, a significant difference between typical reviews.
That's a good way to put it. I think for the gym owner, I think what we do is far more useful. We have had a couple
Hmm.
of clubs that we reached out to said, well, how can you say we're 4-star because we're 4.9 on Google reviews? And they just haven't
Hmm.
really been very open to that. So I would say they would really benefit a lot more from what we could have told them about what we experienced when we, independently and anonymously have visited them. But for a customer, I would say look at both. Look at both. We've had some clubs that haven't scored very well, and I know people love the workout, right? It means that there's definitely areas that need to improve in terms of creating an experience. A lot of the standards we look at is how the first time client gets welcomed. Like most of our evaluators will be going in there for the first time. So what you can get, and this is where I think it would be different between Google reviews and say what we do. The community love it. They get treated well. Everyone knows their name. Maybe it's a little bit of a clique there, but they are diehard fans. This is 5 out of 5 every day of the week. This is 5 stars. This is incredible. But when I go in as a brand new person, I'm not being delivered a very good experience. So that means that it wouldn't score well on our process, but it would probably score well on Google reviews, because once you get
Hmm.
into the community, once you sort of make friends with them and they welcome you in, everything's wonderful and everything is great. So look, if you're there and you love it, or you love that particular workout, then you should definitely go there. So maybe you'd look at both ours and also Google reviews, and you could make your own mind up. But for the business owner, for the club operator, the information we give them, I think, would be far, far more useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so far, if you had a couple big takeaways that you've learned from this process, as far as like, you being an operator, you being, someone who likes to, through your podcast and your speaking, inform and help the industry overall move forward, like what are some of the big value points you've sucked out of this thing?
Man, there's so many that I just don't
Hmm.
really know where to start. And as part
Awesome.
of this process, my business partner evaluated base, and it was really interesting to go through that on the club owner side. And I
Yeah.
was just
Were
hoping
you
we'd get at
nervous?
least 4 stars, and we
Yeah.
did. We got 4 stars through our process. Obviously, I was hoping for 5, but it was really, really good feedback. And what it showed me is there were things that I thought were happening that clearly weren't, especially around the orientation, which we have standards around that, and how you welcome clients, and also the sales process at the end was a little bit weak. I thought we were stronger at that, and it just showed me that I thought these things were being done every time. They're clearly not. And so we really focused on training with the staff. We went through our standards again in the team meeting that we had the following week. Really did a lot of work on that in the background. And then when he came back a month later, he did it again and we scored much, much better. And so it was really useful for me to go through that process and say, well, I thought these things were being done. Maybe when I was there in the club, these things were being done, but obviously they're not being done every time. So that was interesting for me to see personally. In terms of the data, which has been one of the most interesting parts of this, because we've done now over 50 evaluations in New York, Singapore, London, of course, Sydney and Dubai. So we're getting up to about 300 evaluations now, is you get to see which regions are excelling in which areas and where we're just not doing well as a fitness industry overall. We talk a lot about learning from the best restaurants, the best hotels. I've heard this a lot over the last decade, that we need to do better basically and offer better service. And we're charging an amount of money where I've always thought we needed to do better. When I first went to New York, it was 2018, loved going to all the top gyms there, $35, $40 for a drop-in class. And I think we need to get in the mindset that if we charge $40 for a drop-in, we need to deliver a $40 experience. I think we sometimes forget that. That's quite a lot of money. I think you can expect a 5-star experience for that. So little things like, you know, welcoming you in the right way, using your name, smiling, making eye contact, starting the class on time, the coach getting there early and connecting with you before you've done the class, having a chat with you, understanding about your goals, understanding if there's any injuries. All of this for me should be the bare minimum. It should be like the minimum requirement that we do as coaches and as sort of boutique premium brands. I knew we weren't doing this, but now we have the data to show that. So we talked before we hit record, Eric, that names just aren't really being used very often. Less than 50%. I don't know the exact stats now, but less than 50% of gyms, coaches, and also front desk staff are using names. And it's just such an easy win to develop some connection with the client. We have the software. It has Eric on my screen. Eric, do you live around here? It's such an easy thing to do. Do you live in the city? What kind of training do you do normally? One of our standards is around showing genuine interest, so by asking questions. Again, it's just the very basics of human interaction, really, or hospitality. Certainly, is just ask a question. At the end of the workout, we have a standard that the front desk and the coach checks in with the client. Oh, how did you enjoy the session? How was it? And it's just so rare that these things are being done, and it's just such an easy win. And to have the data around that has been interesting, but also to have conversations with club owners around that has been interesting. Some are like, we need to do better, this is great, this is golden information, we're going to improve. But some are like, oh, it's hard to get the staff nowadays. And often you find that the conversation you have with the club owner kind of matches up to how they've scored. I think once you start telling yourselves these stories, oh, you just can't get the
Yeah.
staff nowadays. Oh, Gen Z just don't want to do any of this stuff. You tell yourself that, and it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's just one example. The name usage that we've seen isn't really being done very often. I mean, another interesting one in New York, there's it's the lowest in the world by a considerable margin for doing some kind of injury check at the beginning. And that can be done either at the beginning of the class, it can be done, our evaluators always get there early. So they have to get there at least 15, 20 minutes early before the class to give an opportunity to do all of these things. And I believe it was about 25, 26% of New York studios are doing some kind of like injury check at some point in that process. It could even be the front desk asking, like, oh, Jack, is there anything the coach should know? It's your first time doing this cycling, Pilates class, whatever it might be. And so again, to see that so low in New York compared to London and Singapore, again, was quite interesting. So Eric, one of the most exciting things about this is to get this out, to get these stories out, this data, and to start conversations like we're having now. Should we be doing this? How can we get better at this? So that's one of the most exciting things for me about what we're doing at the Fit Guide.
Yeah, I can feel your excitement, man. It's great. I love it. What's the plan for you? Like as a business, like, is there are you bootstrapping this? You guys take a little bit of investment? Like, I imagine it's not super capital intensive to start, right? I don't know. You'd have to tell me, but do you have a monetization plan? Like okay, let me put it this way. 5 years from now, you and I are having a beer in Singapore or
Hope
wherever,
so.
and you're like, dude, I can't believe it's been this successful, right? Like, what does that look like to you? What would have to have happened?
I love it. That's a great question. Got a great perspective to look at it through. We have bootstrapped it. It has, I mean, it's not a crazy amount of money, but it's been quite a lot because we pay our evaluators very well. So a lot of our evaluators came from hospitality. We don't really look for fitness necessarily as a background because coaches can have their own sort of biases. And I think it's important to say we don't actually evaluate like the program. We don't say, all those exercises shouldn't have really gone together. I don't think you can do that because 10 coaches are going to say 10 different things. So we evaluate the average person's experience. We evaluate, my mum going to do a workout rather than sort of me as a coach with my coach's hat on. So we do pay our evaluators well. So that has made it, a bit of money to sort of get up and running. So we want to be known as the industry standard for boutique fitness experiences. We will be going into other areas as well, such as big box. People have asked us about personal training as well. We do genuinely want to help the industry improve. So, as I said, we go in, we pay for everything, for the visit, the evaluator, the class, and everything else. And then we get on a call with the club to let them know where they can improve. And that's certainly been very, very helpful to the clubs. So hopefully that helps us to be recognized as an industry standard. Had a great conversation with Brandon Cullen from Metabolic, who I know you're connected with as well. So he scored, or his Brooklyn location scored very well. They purchased our full report, which has all of their standards. And what he said, which I absolutely loved, is he shared the report with all of his franchisees and said, look, this is a great industry standard. Have a good read through. Make sure you're doing these things. He's worked some of those standards into his processes. And some people said to me before we started, are you worried about that happening, about it being shared amongst brands of all the franchisees? And I was like, honestly, that's what we want, because that helps us take one step towards being accepted as an industry standard. If Metabolic are using that and it's helping them improve their service and their processes and everything else, I mean, there's the whole it's helping people have a better experience and helping them get fitter and stronger. And that's kind of cool. That's obviously part of our mission, but also it's helping businesses get better. It's helping us become more recognized as an industry standard. We will be looking for investment, Eric. So if anyone's listening and they're interested, do reach out. We want to roll out in the US next year, and we'll definitely need a bit of a cash injection to do that. But one reason we want to do US is because it has been accepted so well. I think Americans kind of get the hospitality side a little bit more, I think, than say the UK, for example. Singapore has accepted it very, very, very well, but the US just seems to really get it in a way that the rest of the world doesn't. And a lot of people have said, when are you coming to this state? When are you coming to this city? There's a lot of demand for it. We're speaking to a lot of big franchises that have locations all through the US, and they're saying, look, when you have the infrastructure here, we'd love to work with you. So get some money in, expand next year, probably the US, but we certainly won't neglect the other sort of main cities in fitness capitals around the world. One thing that's been interesting in the US is to see these kind of second and third tier cities, some of which I've hardly heard of, have actually got a whole ton of studios. You look at the UK and London's thriving. Outside of that, there's not really much going on. But the US fitness market is certainly thriving. In terms of revenue model, we work with clubs to help them improve. So we have
Okay.
online training that we do, video courses, or we work with the clubs individually, or regular evaluations. So the hospitality has been doing this for decades. They don't typically do this internally, like no top hotel would do it. They outsource it to other companies. So we can go in like, Forbes Travel Guide does, for example. They work privately with companies. We can use our brand standards that we've developed and also our standards, but their brand standards as well. So a lot of brands have certain things that need to be said at certain times, or certain ways that the class is warmed up, or maybe the technology has to be welcomed in a certain way. So we can build their standards into ours and do private evaluations for them. So we've been working with some brands. We've got some, as I said, some conversations with some really big brands in the US to, make sure quality is maintained. If you're a franchise and you want to make sure that your franchisees are doing the right things and they're doing it consistently, or you want to just help them improve their service, what we offer will be invaluable to them. So look, in 5 years, Eric, to sort of come to the way you wrapped it up, is I hope that when we're having that beer in Singapore, that we've rolled through the world, we've been to the main fitness capitals and the main cities in the US and evaluated the top fitness experiences there. I hope the consumers are using us all around the world to find the best yoga classes, bar classes, cycling classes. And if we do that, the financial side will come along with it, right? But yeah, we want to have that impact on the industry, and we've seen in the first sort of 6 months since launch that we've certainly been able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing, man. And, I think typically you can say that if you create value, the money will come, right? You'll figure it out. And, Metabolic, of course, huge fan of Brandon and Kirk and everything they've done there. And Metabolic, they don't speak average. That's the tagline, right? I love those guys. What other brands? I mean, is there any other ones that you'd like to highlight that seem to be doing exceptionally well, like Metabolic?
Yeah, there's one that I think most people in the industry really understand and can see, and that's Orange Theory. So they have just consistently create a great experience. They do a lot of the things that other clubs and other gyms aren't doing. And I think what we've seen a little bit is like younger people that are really into their training and love doing CrossFit and stuff like that. They have a certain sort of perception of Orange Theory. And they're like, oh, what do you mean that's a 5-star gym? They're not doing the kind of training that I personally like. So, well, that's fine. But Orange Theory is great for a certain type of person, and they're really speaking to that person and they're serving them really well. And we've looked at our 3 evaluations that we did in New York. We evaluated 3 Orange Theory locations, and I went to do a quality control check in one of them as well. And they're developing a great experience. They do everything in the right way. They ask you to come early. They ask you about your goals. They introduce themselves in the right way. They introduce you to the next person in the process who kind of shows you around.
Cool.
They introduce you to the coach. They make sure you get a great workout. They explain all of the technology. They just do it so well that you walk out and you feel warm, you feel like you've got a good workout, you feel like you understand the concepts really well, you understand what it means to continue your training there. And then some of the sort of, I don't know, quote unquote, cooler new concepts, you go in, and yeah, for me personally as a coach, I kind of enjoy the workout, but they're not doing any of these things. It's like if you don't know, then, get out. It's kind of a bit of a feeling of that. And so, yeah, Orange Theory is a good example of like, you know, whether you like the workout or not is up to you, right? And if it's not for you, then don't go there. But for many people, they are really doing things well and they're really creating a great experience. Another thing we've seen, Eric, which has been interesting, is that the inconsistency of some brands, whether that be country to country or even within a country. And one of our evaluators, who's also doing a bit of other work for us as well, kind of editing reports and the like, he says, I don't understand. How can this one be 72%, but this one be 91%? For me, it wasn't very surprising, because I know that some franchises, they just might not have the systems, they might not have the support, maybe they've grown too quickly and the franchisees sort of, can't keep up, or they can't keep up with the franchisees that are coming in and which ones are doing well and which ones aren't. So I wasn't surprised at that at all, but some people really have been. And for some that don't quite understand what we do, they even sort of question, well, how can this be 5-star in London, but this is 3-star in New York? And it's like, well, yeah, we are evaluating this individual club. This individual club is doing a fantastic job. This individual club in a different city isn't. So that's been something else which has been quite interesting to see.
Yeah, fascinating, man. I mean, it's going to be, if nothing else, you're going to walk out of this with this just mountain of knowledge and insight across the industry. That's just going to be, it's going to be extremely valuable.
I want to share it as
As
well,
we
Eric. I
can,
want to get that out there as well. That's why I like doing
yeah,
podcasts
yeah.
like this, because we can share some of what we've learned, and it's the learning curve has just been huge, and
Oh, I
even
can
now we're
only
analyzing a lot
imagine.
of the data, we're going through it, we're having a look at it, and this is for me is where it gets super interesting, because we've done the third city now, and so now we can really compare region to region, city to city. Some countries, it's interesting. Some countries are doing very well. Some brands, sorry, are doing very well in one country, but not in another. And this is where it gets really super interesting. If we want to go really deep, we'll go off the podcast, and I'll tell you exactly
Yeah,
what's going on with
let's
it.
do I love it. Yeah, I'm a huge, I love data. Um, as we kind of wrap this up, Jack, what in the spirit of collaboration and, moving the industry forward, like what do you need right now? If you want to hear from people, how can they help you?
How can they help me? I think they can help me by just understanding more about what we do really and why we're doing it. So, go to thefitguide.com, see what we're doing, understand our process a little bit more. I mean, we're definitely more on the vibe of how we can help the industry really. I think if anyone just wants to jump on a call and they're a club owner, I'm happy to do so. They can connect with me through LinkedIn. I guess, by let us help you will kind of help us, I think. Whether you have 20 franchises, 100 franchises, whether you're a single unit location, we're definitely happy to talk to you. Whether that's just sort of any help that we might be able to offer, we do have free resources. So there's a lot that we can do, for free. Or if you want a deeper level of help and a deeper level of service, we can discuss what training looks like, regular evaluations. If the idea of infusing hospitality and human connection into your experience appeals to you, we can certainly help with that, and help you sort of do that at scale as well. So yeah, rather than how to help us, I think that's probably a better way to approach it really. And we have a newsletter where we share some of this data. The stats and the data. We send one bi-weekly at the moment.
Hmm.
We're looking to ramp that up soon to weekly. But yeah, thefitsguide.com/subscribe. It's free, and you can start to benefit from some of the work that we've been doing and see how it can help your business and help you start to think about things. That's really what we want to do. Just as a quick example of that, Eric, so yesterday's newsletter that we sent out is that 80% of studios are offering like an orientation unprompted when you arrive at the studio. That was a little bit of data that we picked up on yesterday. And then Singapore was the
Hmm.
lowest at 74, New York was 82%, so a little bit better, London 85. But how can that not be 100%? If I arrive at a studio for the first time, how can they not be like, okay, Jack, so lockers are down here, studio's here, wait here, the class starts in 20 minutes. It can be brief, but it needs to be unprompted. So we hope that by sending out this data, people get thinking. And they're like, yeah, God, do we do that every time? I think we do. Didn't we talk about that in a meeting a year ago? We need to revisit that.
Yeah.
We need to make sure it's in our processes. We need to make sure it's in our training, and we need to make sure that's being done.
Yeah, awesome. And these are all, here's the thing is like these are all low cost, no cost ways to
Right?
improve, right? And that's like if you're an operator and you're in that critical phase of trying to get escape velocity with your business, right? Like this is the stuff that really makes a difference, and it's really easy to once you've been operating for 3, 4, 5 years to get very complacent. Super easy. It's like the frog in the boiling water. It just happens so quickly, but slowly at the same time. So it's great stuff, man. And if people want to
100%.
reach you personally, besides thefitguy.com, is there any other place you'd like them to go?
Yeah, I just want to just elaborate on that a little bit, because
Yeah,
it's
please.
such a good point that it's free. These things don't cost anything. It's not this massive new technology you have to purchase. It's not
Right.
heart rate monitors or a new software or anything like that. These things are free, and it's more just a mindset shift of, yeah, let's connect with people. Let's give them a great time. Let's make sure it's the best hour of their day, and really make sure your whole team are in on that. One other one that's just sprung to mind. I don't have the stats. Sorry, Eric. Next time I'll make sure I've got the actual data, but it's a disappointingly low percentage, I think around about half, that during the class are offering individual words of encouragement. So what that means is, rather than floating
Mm.
around the room and saying, okay, good job, team, well done, guys, you're smashing it, it's actually going up to Eric and saying, okay, try and go a little bit low on the squat, Eric. Yes, you got it, good work. Or like, oh, looking good at the back there, Eric, whatever it might be, right? Individual words of
Yeah,
encouragement, because that kind of really means something to you. Yeah, great work,
for sure.
team. It's no one really feels much from that. And so to see it so low was, quite disappointing. It's free. It's free. Get your coaches to do it. It's such an easy win. It will help them get busier classes. It will help everyone do better. It'll help them become a better coach, a more industry-leading coach. So it's just such a good point, Eric. It's free, right? So let's do these things. How to contact me? Like yourself, LinkedIn, I think, is the best place. So if you just type in Jack Thomas, or I'm LinkedIn/IN, is it LN/Fitness Business Asia. So pretty
Cool.
easy to find. That's where I get most of my content out. That's definitely the best place to connect. If you do connect with me, please leave a little note to say that you heard me on the Future of Fitness podcast, and it'd be great to connect there for sure.
Nice. I like that. Jack, man, it's always a pleasure. Let's not make it 4 years.
Right?
Let's try to do this a little more often. I think once a year is a really good cadence for us to catch up and discuss all things. And I appreciate you getting up early and meet me for my evening time and recording. It's always great. And man, just keep up what you're doing. Obviously you have the passion and excitement behind this to make this really drive forward. So I think it's really cool. And I'm rooting for you, man. Keep it up.
Yeah, likewise. Let's make sure it's not 4 years. And also, let's make sure the next one's in person. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
I much
talking.
prefer the in-person podcasts actually
Me
to
too.
Zoom. You can have a much more natural conversation. So maybe Fit Summit next year in New York, possibly, or
Let's
if you
do it.
can make it out to Singapore, that'd be awesome. But yeah, keep doing what you're doing, man. I love the Future of Fitness podcast. I've been a regular listener since we first connected in 2019. So yeah, I guess thank you for everything you do for the industry and the good messages you put out. And yeah, look forward to doing this again soon.
Right on. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Thomas.